Esres Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Avodah Zarah, number 6, daf Ayin Vav, daf Vav, and we're going to start from like 6 lines from the bottom, 5 lines from the bottom of Hey Amid Beis. Basically, what the Gemara said before, we learned in the Mishnah that one is not allowed to, let's say, sell an animal to a goy 3 days prior to his holiday. Why? We're going to learn about that, but let's presume that if you're going to sell him the animal, he's going to use that animal as a sacrifice to his idol. And you're causing him to serve an idol. And therefore, you get a sin for that. So 3 days prior, you're not allowed to settle him an animal. Okay? So now the question is, how come by a Jew, it takes him 30 days to discuss and he starts thinking about sacrifices for the holiday, and a goy, it's just 3 days. Because how do you know it's 30 days for a Jew? Because the Mishnah says that in Hilchas Pesach, we start discussing the laws of the sacrifice of the Korban Pesach 30 days, or Shimon Gamliel says 2 weeks. But it takes us a very long time to go through the animals to prepare for the sacrifice, at least 2 weeks before Pesach. And by a goy, you're telling me he starts preparing for his holiday 3 days before. So the Gemara answers are very interesting answers. Goyim always have it easy. A Yid, we have a lot of blemishes that could disqualify an animal. Even if the animal has something with its eye, we disqualify the animal. So therefore, we need 30 days to review an animal. But the Goyim, when they want to disqualify an animal for a sacrifice, all they're looking for is the mechusar aver. It's missing a limb. If it's not missing a limb, then they're okay with it. They let things slide. No one's perfect. So therefore, all they need is 3 days to check an animal to see if it's worthy for the sacrifice. Now, where's the source that a goy, even for he will not sacrifice something that's missing a limb for his idol? I mean, where's that source? The Amar Ablaza. We're going 5 lines from the bottom. Minayin, how do I know? L'mechusar ever the asal b'nei noach. How do I know that if, let's say, a goy wants to bring a korban to Hashem, so he could bring a korban that, let's say, that has a blemish, but as long as it's not missing a limb. When it's missing a limb, it's also for B'nai Noach. And the same idea is that they're going to do that for their idols. Their only concern is about missing a limb. So the answer is the Ksiv, because it says by Noach, Mikol Achai, Mikol Basar, Shnai Mikol. So the Torah says Mikol Achai. The Torah told Noach, bring live animals into the Teva. But obviously it doesn't mean live animals. Obviously he was going to bring live animals into the Teva. Amr Torah, the Torah told Noach, make sure you bring animals that all their limbs are living, and that all their limbs are in good shape. Says the Gemara. So that's what we're living. So therefore, and the reason is obviously because Noach had to bring karbonos from these animals after he left the table. So we see that the main thing that a goy is looking for is that it's not missing a limb. Says the Gemara, says the Gemara, I'm sorry, I missed it. A limb? A limb. We need that pasuk, that a goy not only is not allowed to bring an animal that's missing a limb, but he's also not an animal that's going to die and very shortly. Sometimes a person can have an internal injury. He has all his limbs, but an internal injury, let's say a hole in the lung, that's going to make that animal die within a year. So maybe that pasuk Mikol Achai is teaching you that Noach had to bring into the Tema animals that are not a treifa, that we know that they don't have a puncture, an internal puncture. Answers the Gemara, treifa melchayas zera nafka. Not to bring a treifa animal into the Teva, he knew that it had to be an animal, Mlechaya Zera, that could have offspring. That told us that you're not allowed to bring a treifa into the Teva. Mikol Achai taught us you're not allowed to bring any animal that's missing a limb. Says the Gemara, That pasuk L'chayis Zarah could exclude a treifa animal because a treifa, according to this opinion, a treifa cannot have offspring. Ella, we go to the top of the page. Ella l'man but according to the opinion, treifa yoledes, that a treifa could have offspring. So therefore, how do I know my iklamema? What's your story? In other words, how would I know that Noach was not allowed to bring into the teva any animal that is a treifa? Again, a treifa is an animal that has an internal blemish that is going to make it die within the year. So how do I would know that? On Makra, the pasuk says itach. The Torah told Noach, bring the animals to be like you, like you. They have to be like you. And since Noach was a healthy human being and not a treifa, so the animals that were brought into the teva also had to be healthy. Says the Gemara, V'dilma Noach gufi treifa hava. Maybe Noach himself was a treifa. Maybe Noach was somebody who was a diseased person. And says the Gemara, Tamin Kasif Bey. It says about Noach, when describing him, he was complete. So it's mashma, it implies that he was a healthy person. Says the Gemara says not so. The Dilma, maybe the word Tamim means healthy, doesn't mean healthy in spirit. Bidrach of Hoya. He was a humble person. He had low expectations, but it doesn't mean that he was not a treifa. So the Gemara says Sadik Kasif Bey. That teaches from that. From the word tzaddik, you know he was a humble person. You don't need Talmud to teach you that. So it must be that Talmud teaches you that he was a healthy person. So no, the Gemara says, Dilma, I need both psukim, Tamim and tzaddik. I need both psukim to teach you about Noach. Tamim, he was bedrachav, he was a healthy, he was complete as a humble person and a person of low expectation. Tzaddik teaches you b'masav hava. He didn't steal. He was not greedy. So somebody that's what the Tamim and Tzaddik teach you about Noach. But could be that Noach himself, as far as his bodily health, maybe he was a treifa. So therefore, how do you know? Maybe Noach was allowed to bring animals that were treifa into the teva. So the Gemara says, Loi sal kadaitach. I can't think that wouldn't be a havamina. That's something we can't entertain. The Noach gufei treifa hava. The isal kadaitach Noach treifa hava. If you're thinking that Noach was a treifa, Amale Rachmana, so the Torah is basically saying, Kavasi Ayal, somebody who's similar to you, Noach, as an unhealthy animal, bring into the teva. Shleimim loy ta'ayal, an animal that's healthy, don't bring into the teva. So that means that most likely Noach was a very healthy person, and the Torah told him to teach you itach, to teach you that bring animals that are as healthy as you into the teva. So therefore, from there I know that Noach couldn't bring a treifa into the teva. So the Gemara says, "Hashda di nafkalem itach." So if I know from itach that Noach couldn't bring a treifa, l'chayis zera lameli. What does l'chayis zera teach you? That the animals have to be capable of giving off offspring. So the Gemara says, "Imi itach." If I would have only had itach Noach havamina, I would have think that Noach should bring in animals l'tzafta ba'alma to keep Noach company. So vafil is zaken, even if it's an old animal, vafil is soris, even if it's castrated animal, Noach could bring into the teva. Kasav Rachman Zera. So the Torah also writes that these animals not only to be healthy and young, but they have to be capable of having offspring. So we know Noach could not bring a treifa into the teva, and we know from the pasuk that says Mikol Hachai, that Noach teaches that it has to be animals that every limb is alive of the animal. From there we learn an animal that's missing a limb would be disqualified for a sacrifice, the way Noach had to bring sacrifices from these animals after he left the teva. From there we know that Goyim are concerned mostly when their sacrifices only if it's missing a limb. And therefore, they need to check an animal if it's missing a limb 3 days prior to their holiday. So therefore, 3 days prior to their holiday, you're not supposed to sell them animals because they're going to use those animals as a sacrifice. And we don't want to give them animals that they're going to use as a sacrifice for their idols. Iboilu. So the Gemara asks the question. The Mishnah said, Shloishi Yomim, 3 days. Doesn't mean that the 3 days includes the day of the holiday. Let's say the holiday is Tuesday. So does that mean you can't start selling him from Sunday, right? I'm sorry, from Shabbos. So you can't sell them Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, and I'm sorry, same the them and their holidays is a total of 3 days. You can't sell them Sunday, Monday, and their holiday, which is on Tuesday. That's the 3 days. It means 3 days prior to their holiday, not including the holiday itself. So if the holiday is on Wednesday, then you can't start selling them on Sunday. Toshma, come in here. Rabbi Shmuel says, Shloisha lifneim ushloisha achreim asa. 3 days prior to their holiday and 3 days after their holidays, you're not allowed to sell them anything. Isal kedayitech, if you would say, hein ve'edeim, so then that Rabbi Shmuel meant hein ve'edeim, them and their holidays, the holidays including in the count of 3. Rabbi Shmuel oime hein ve'edeim chashav lu miyikar v'chashav lu b'soif. Is he counting the holiday itself as part of the 3 days prior, and then counting the holiday itself as 3 days at the end? Because look at what Rabbi Shmuel is saying: 3 days prior, and then 3 days after. The holiday itself is what? If the holiday itself is counted as part of the prior, so then how do you get 3 days after? You should only have 2 days after the holiday, because the holiday was already counted for the prior number. Answers the Gemara, you're right. I did the Tana Shloish Lifneim. Since it included the holiday as part of the 3 days before, the holiday included, so 2 days plus the holiday. Tana Namish Shloish Lachreim. So it says the word Shloisha afterwards, but the holiday is not included in the after count, so you only have 2 days after the holiday. Tashma, come in here. The Amar of Tachlifi bar of Dima Shmuel. Shmuel said, Yoim Noitzri, the Christian day, which is Sunday, according to Rabbi Shmuel, then according to Rabbi Shmuel, since every Sunday is a Christian holiday, so according to Rabbi Shmuel, you're not allowed to sell them, you're not allowed to sell an animal to a goy all week. Why? 3 days prior, 3 days after, and the holiday itself. Now, if you want to say that it's always including the holiday, so the holiday itself is included, so Sunday is included, it comes out that Wednesday and Thursday you would be allowed to sell them an animal. So how did Shmuel say, according to Rabbi Shmuel, it's always going to be aser. If we're including the holidays, so then Rabbi Shmuel meant to say only 5 days of the week is going to be aser to sell a goy, but 2 days you would be permitted. Answers the Gemara, you're right. According to Rabbi Shmuel, leave the Rabbi Shmuel, that Rabbi Shmuel holds that it's the holiday is not counted as the 3 days. It's 3 days prior to any holiday, 3 days after, the holiday is not included. My question is, Alibi the Rabban. The Rabbanan who only ask 3 days before, do they mean the holiday included, or it's 3 days and then comes the holiday? Ravina said, Tashma, come in here. These following are the Goyish holidays. This is a Mishnah. Kalanda, Satrunem, Ukaratasim. These are names of Goyish holidays. V'amar Rab Chanan bar Ava, Kalanda, the Mishnah says the first one is Kalanda, is Ches Yomim Achat Tegufa. That's 8 days following the winter solstice. Satrina Noya Ishmani Yom Lifnei Tegufa is 8 days prior to the winter solstice. So they have like a 16-day holiday. V'simanach, if you want to know which way Rav Chanan explained it, that which way is listed in the Mishnah. It lists the holiday that's after the solstice first, and then the 8-day holiday prior to the solstice second. Achar, the later one, came before the prior one. That's a way to remember it. Anyway, if the Mishnah, when our Mishnah says 3 days prior, now if our Mishnah meant 3 days, including the holiday, well, then really, if these are the holidays, the examples that the Mishnah is giving, so the Mishnah should be saying, Asara Hava, there are 10 days you're not allowed to sell them. 2 days prior to the holiday, and then the 8 days of the holiday itself. So the Mishnah should say that there's 10 days you're not allowed to sell them. But our Mishnah only says 3 days. So it must mean our Mishnah is including 3 days prior to the holiday. We're not talking about the holiday. Of course, you can't sell them an animal on the holiday. But the Chiddush of the Mishnah is 3 days prior, not part of the holiday. And says the Gemara, Tana Kula Kalanda Chad Yom Chashuv. The whole kalanda, the whole 8-day holiday, is counted as one holiday, one day. True, you're not allowed to sell them for 8 days, but not every holiday has 8 days. Some holidays are just one day. So the Mishnah says 3 days. You're not allowed to sell them around. You're not allowed to sell them animals around their holiday. Amar Ravashi says, Tashma. We learned Lifnei Edeim Shel Goyim Shlosh Yomim. Lifnei Edeim. The Mishnah said prior to their holidays, you have to 3 days. You don't do business with them. You don't sell them animals. That's what the Mishnah says. And if the Mishnah means to say this and the holidays, so 3 days includes the holidays, listen, the Mishnah should word it better. When it comes to holidays, it's 3 days. 3 days we abstain from selling them. What does we say lifnei edeim, prior? What's this lifnei? It says the word lifnei lemute la'achar, because our Mishnah wants to say after the holiday is over, you could sell them. That's why we only say lifnei before. Then the Mishnah should word it even better. Edam shel goyim yomim, shel goyim is gimel yomim. The holidays of the goyim are 3 days. Lifneihem, before them. So the fact that we put lifnei as the first word of our Masechta, so the proof of that is that we don't count the holiday itself. So what the Mishnah means to say, 3 days prior, not including the holiday itself, one should not sell an animal to a goy. That's what the Mishnah says. You should not buy an animal from a goy and not sell an animal to a goy. So the Gemara says, a new question. Ibailu, let me ask you a question. Mishum harvacha. What's the reason you're not supposed to sell a goy? Is it because the guy is going to be happy and satisfied and give thanks to his idol because he bought a nice animal, and you're causing the guy to thank his idol? Because you're giving him a stumbling block and you're giving him an animal to offer as a sacrifice. Maybe perhaps he's not going to thank his God that he has a sacrifice. It's just he's going to be quietly bring this animal as a sacrifice. What's the difference? What the Isser is? The Mishnah says that you're not allowed to sell them an animal. And says the Gemara, the Islay behavior lididei. Let's say he already owns an animal. So let's say he owns an animal. He amret mishum harvacha. If the question is because you're expanding his choices, because you're giving him another animals, and because of that, he's going to verbally thank his deity. You're expanding his choices of animal, even if he has already an animal to bring as a sacrifice. Still, you're causing him to give thanks to his deity. But if it's because your animal is being used as a sacrifice, well, maybe not. He already has another animal that he dedicated that he's going to use as a sacrifice. Says the Gemara, if somebody already has the item, the person that sells him another item is not over this Aveira. For a blind person, don't give a stumbling block. For example, Vatanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rab Nosson said, we go to Amid Beis, let's say you have a Nazir, and he lives at home. How do you know you're not allowed to stick your hand out and offer him a cup of wine? A Nazir is not allowed to drink wine. Over Aver Menachai Lebnei Noach, or offering Aver from a live animal to a Bnei Noach. He's not allowed to eat Eva Menachai. How do you know you're not allowed to do that? Talmud Loiva, Lifnei Eva, Loisita Michshel. You're not allowed to, for somebody who's usher on something, you're not allowed to give them the stumbling block. You're not allowed to give them the means to violate their prohibitions. And by giving a cup of wine to a Nazir, you're making it easier for him to violate his prohibition. But in our case, the Gemara understood that every Nazir has the ability to have wine by himself. So you're just giving him an extra cup of wine. And the Torah and the Brisa says that you're oivel lifnei evil asitin mikshol. So how could you say that if the goy has an animal already, if you offer him another animal for his sacrifice, you're not going to be oivel lifnei evil asitin mikshol. Here by a Nazir, well, we say that even if the Nazir has wine, offering him another cup of wine, you're causing him to violate. You're going to be violating lifnei iver leisitein mikshah. And says the Gemara, no, that Hachama Ma'iskin, the case of the Nazir was he did not have access to wine. To call Betrei Avid Nahara. There are two sides to the river. There's one side of the river, which is the Nazir. He has access to nothing. And you're on the other side, and you're the only one that has that access to the wine. So by you offering him the wine, you're making it easier for him to violate his provision. I'll prove it to you, because the Ketani says, Lo Yoshet, don't stretch out. So it's a situation where the Nazir, has no access to the wine himself. Like Tani Lo Yite, don't give it to him. Shmami, no, it's in a situation that the Nazir can't have access for himself. So the Gemara doesn't know yet. The Gemara doesn't resolve this question. What's the reason why you're not allowed to sell an animal to a guy prior to his holiday? Is it because he's going to give thanks to his deity now that he has a nicer animal, or is it simply because he's going to use the animal as a sacrifice? And he's going to use that animal as a sacrifice, and you're overlifting evil mishral. And the difference would be what happens if the goy already has an animal dedicated for a sacrifice. But the Mishnah also says, by the way, that you're not allowed to buy an animal from the goy 3 days prior. Why is that? He's not going to use the money as a sacrifice, but perhaps once you buy an animal from him, he will use the money to buy a better animal. So that you could be overlifting evil mishral that way. So the Gemara doesn't leave this resolved. The Gemara asks the question, Nasan v'nasan, Mai, what happens if you did do business with the goy prior to the holiday? Let's say you sold him an animal. Can you use the money? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Nasan v'nasan aser, you're not allowed to use the money. Rish Lakish Amar, Nasan v'nasan mutar, if b'diavad you sold him an animal, you could benefit from the money. Eis Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish, Eideyam shall goyim nasav v'nasan asur, and the Brisa says if you sell an animal to a guy, you're not allowed to benefit from the money. My love, doesn't the Brisa mean lifnei eideyim, prior to the holiday? And so we see that if you sell an animal to the guy prior to the holiday, so you're not allowed to benefit from the money. And says the Gemara, Loi, eideyim dafka, on their holiday, even Rish Lakish would agree you're not allowed to sell them an animal, because that for sure he's going to use it right then and there for a sacrifice. But if it's prior, if b'diavad you sold it, could be the Brisa holds that it is permitted to benefit from the money. Others say, they had a different version. The Shlakish asked the question of Rabbi Yochanan. The Brisa says only on the holiday, if you sell it to them, you're not allowed to benefit from the money. But prior to the holiday, you could benefit from their money. And says the Gemara, so Tani, no, according to this Brisa, Eidayan doesn't mean just on the holiday you're not allowed to sell them, but even prior to the holiday, you also, if b'diavad you sold it to him, you're not allowed to benefit from the money. That's how Rish Yochanan is going to explain this Brisa. But nevertheless, Tanya Kavos to Rish Lakish, the Brisa says like Rish Lakish. When we say that you're not allowed to sell something to a guy, or only something that will be around on the holidays. So for example, you sell him an animal, 3 days later is his holiday. But something that will go spoil prior to the holiday, then there's no isser to do business. So you're allowed to sell him vegetables, even though vegetables, maybe he is something that he would offer to his deity, but if it's something that's going to spoil prior to the holiday, he's not going to offer it as a offering to his deity. Even with an animal, let's say, that stays around, nasan v'nasan, if you sold it prior to the holiday, mutter, you're allowed to benefit from that money. Tani Rab Zid b'drei Rab Oishya. You're not allowed to sell them anything you're allowed to sell to a guy vegetables, because if it's going to rot prior to his holiday. But you're not allowed to buy with money things that like vegetables from them and give them money prior to the holiday, because first of all, he's going to be happy to get rid of them. these vegetables because you're taking something off his burdens. So therefore, you're not allowed to buy from them eat vegetables, but you're allowed to sell them vegetables. Says the Gemara, Himinoi, there was this idol worshiper, let's call it, the Shadulay Dinra, the Kasrana, the Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya B'Yom he sent a brand new coin to Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who was like a Moira, B'Yom Eidoi, in his day of his holiday. It is a token, like you send something to the Jew. Rabbi Yakish was sitting in front of him. Omar, he said, Heicha Eved. The Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya did not want to accept this coin. Eshkale, if I accept this coin, then he's going to go give thanks to his deity. Look, my best friends are Jews. So he's going to thank his deity. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya is going to be causing the guy to thank his deity. Lo yashkele, but Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya says, and this is his quandary, if I'm not going to accept this coin from him, Havi Eva, then the guy is going to have animosity towards me. Rav Shlakish says, Tool uzroik ois labar b'fonav. Take it and throw it into a pit. Throw it into the garbage right in front of him. So the Rabbi Yehuda is saying, what kind of teretz is that? Kolshkin dehavi Eva. Certainly that's going to be cause animosity. Answers the Gemara. So Rish Lakish said, fake it. Throw it like you slipped and it slipped out of your hands and fell into the toilet. That's what you should do. Even though it's like, a little bit not honest, but there was no way out of it. You don't want to get animosity to this min, and you also don't want him to give him to be so thankful to his God that he gave something to a Jew. Another 2 minutes and then we'll stop. Mishnah said, Lashin lishmehem. You're not allowed to lend the goy. So the Gemara says, Bishlam and lahashilan the kamabachle. By you lending an object to a goy, you lend him your motorcycle, he's benefiting from it. And he's going to thank his God. Look, the Jew loaned me his motorcycle. Avalishmahem, to borrow from them, why can't a Jew borrow something from a goy prior to his holiday? Amar Abai says, Gezerah lishmehem autolashilam. There's a Gezerah. If we allowed you to borrow from them, you might come to lend them. And lend them is where the Isser is. Rava says, Kula mishim da ozol maidu. Even if you had to borrow from the guy is thankful for that. Why? Because he's thankful that the Yid needs him. And that's why he's going to come to thank his deity that, even the Jews need me. The halvas a little bit from you're allowed to lend them money and borrow from them. So the Gemara is saying question: why are you allowed to borrow from a guy? Why are you not allowed to borrow from a guy prior to their holiday? They're losing out by lending you the money. They may not get paid. Amar Abai said, truth is, you're allowed to borrow from them. But if we allowed you to borrow from them, you might come to lend them money. And lending them money is really what the Isser is, to do that to a guy. Rava says, it's all part of this whole thing that the guy is going to be thankful to his idol, that he actually, that the Jew needs him to borrow money, so he's going to be thankful. One more, to pay them back a loan or to get paid back on a loan. You're not allowed to do that prior to their holiday. To pay them back, if you pay them back their loan, your outstanding loan with them, they're going to go thank their idol that, that the Jew paid me back. To get paid back from them, they feel bad about that because they're losing money. They're paying you back. So why can't they accept the money back to them prior to the holiday? If we allowed you to get paid back from them, you might come to pay your loans to them. And that's where the real problem is. Rava says, it's all because he's going to be thankful to his God. Again, because if he pays you back the money that he owes you, he's going to, although he feels bad, but he's thankful that he's now debt-free. Utzricha, we need all these three cases, the machlokes, the itana lasav lasas mehem mishum to kumar v'chlei ba'ozol moida, because to do business with him, I'm afraid he's going to benefit a profit, and he's going to be thankful to his idol. Avalishal mehem the mu'ute kamamaytlu, but to borrow a motorcycle from them, let's say, I might think you're permitted shapi dummy because you're causing them a loss. The itana lishal mehem, if it would just say that borrowing something from them is not permitted mishum dechashiv milsa v'azol moida, because it's very special to him that you borrowing his motorcycle, so he's going to thank his God. Of a little man, but to borrow money from them, I would think that you're permitted to do that because Sarah Ba'alma Islay, because he really doesn't want to lend you the money, but he's lending you the money anyway, so you're causing him pain. I would Omar, he says to him, Tuv loy hadar zuzay, I may not get paid back. So I might think you're allowed to borrow money from them prior to that holiday. V'itani lilvos mehem, if we say that you can't borrow from them, mishum dekamre bal karcham pa'arna, v'hashtamiya ozol moida, because from borrowing from them, he doesn't mind you borrowing from them because he doesn't have so much pain, because he'll force you to pay him back. So therefore, he's happy that the Jews need him for his money, so he's going to give thanks to his idol. Avoli paramehem, but to get paid from them, I might think that it's permitted. To you to get paid back from an outstanding loan that you gave them, I would think that there's no problem with that, because you're actually causing an opposite effect. You're causing the guy to feel bad prior to his holiday because he has to pay you back. Kamash Malan, we need that it's also to get paid back from a guy, because although he feels bad paying you back, but he's happy that he's debt free and he's going to be thankful to his God. So basically what you learn today is most of the time, the reason why you're not allowed to do anything with a goy 3 days prior to his holiday is because he's going to be happy that he's benefiting, or he's happy that you need him. And therefore, a Jew needs him, he's going to go give thanks to his God, and you're causing him for him to be thankful to his deity. And that's where the Isser is. That's called Maida. Okay, we'll stop here.